put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. But while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat, and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. And the slaves of the householder came and said to him, "Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from?" He answered, "An enemy has done this." The slave said to him, "Then do you want us to go and gather them?" But he replied, "No, for in gathering the weeds you would uproot the weed along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time I will tell the reapers, collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn." He put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all seeds, but when it has grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. Jesus told the crowds all these things in parables. Without a parable, he told them nothing. This was to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet. "I will open my mouth to speak in parables. I will proclaim what has been hidden from the foundation of the world." Then he left the crowds and went into the house. And his disciples approached him, saying, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field." He answered, "The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers. And they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let anyone with ears listen. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then in his joy he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. When it was full, they drew it ashore, sat down, and put the good into baskets but threw out the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all this? They answered, "Yes." And he said to them, "Therefore every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a household who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old." When Jesus had finished these parables, he left that place.
Thanks, Matt. So before we jump in, I'd like to pray, and there's a lot going on in our community, so the extent to which you're comfortable praying, I just want to pray for our students and this time together. God, thanks. Lord, we recognize that ours it's a crazy world right now, and especially for our students, God, and 3 deaths this week. God, pray that you'd give wisdom to those who are walking with them, give wisdom to parents, give wisdom to those students who walk into that school tomorrow with you in them. And God, in a season when hope is so hard to find and purpose is even more difficult, thinking of those students who are yours and those teachers who walk with you, that one relationship at a time, one interaction at a time, you would bring hope and understanding to places like Helena High and Capitol High and our respective middle schools. We love you, God. Amen. So I realized this week, and there was a few conversations I had, I can count specifically 3, where people asked me a question, and as I was answering the question, I realized there's probably a long overdue thank you that I owe many of you. The question was, so Adam, how's the staff? Like, are you tired? Are people burned out? Like, how's it going? And I very quickly, in all three cases, answered with an assured, like, we're great. And then later I checked in with the staff. I'm like, am I the emperor with no clothes? Like, are we as good as I think we are? Yeah, we're great. And what I realized within all that is there's this whole context that maybe we haven't talked about. And again, there's this thank you that is overdue. So I want to say thanks, but I want to give some context. First of all, part of the reason why I haven't focused on that, and I think some of it came from, if you've seen that article in The Atlantic, I think it's worth your attention. I'm not sure that I agree with everything in it, but I think it represents a mindset that's very present right now and an experience. And what that article depicts or captures, and if you're interested, shoot me an email, I can send it your way. But it captures well that burnout in church right now is probably higher than it's ever been in our lifetime. Somewhere around a quarter of churches in the country, I think last I heard, are without any kind of pastor. My hesitation in talking about that is I don't like the fact that it would suggest that it's unique to churches and pastors and their staff. I think that we're all tired. I don't believe in a hierarchy between what I do and what you do. Teachers are tired, and nurses are tired, and stay-at-home parents are tired, and people who make lattes are tired. Like, it's been a trying season. Entrepreneurs, to me, it's universal. And so I've avoided the topic just for fear of putting some kind of light on ourselves. But what I realized in answering this question, and I think it was after the third time that it finally occurred to me, that there's a couple things that happened that couldn't have happened without all of your help. The first one was, we were the first church to close in town. I think there was one other church that closed that first weekend. Word came out on a Friday. We closed on a Sunday. And in that season, part of what we really wrestled with and worked on as a staff was this decision that the moment we get permission to reopen, we're going to reopen. And it wasn't intended to be a political statement. It wasn't trying an attempt to be any kind of commentary on COVID and whether caution is right or just going headlong into the world is right. That wasn't our intent. It was to give options. Justin and his team worked so hard on the live feed. We were proud of what we have in that respect. There's some boundaries we've put around it. We're not going to try to compete with some of these national players, but we've created this window into the room. But at the same time, it just felt like the extent to which the government was giving us permission to open, that we should model that. And I look back on it, and it's hilarious to me because we actually had conversations as a staff about, okay, since we could only host about 40 or 50 people, like we might have to host 5 gatherings, and we were ready to do that. Now it's comical because the first weekend there was like 21 people there or something. And again, there's no judgment. I'm not suggesting any judgment towards anyone who was cautious or not. Obviously, most of you weren't there, and I totally respect that. What we wanted to do was start a process of giving people options as they considered what it looks like to live in a COVID world. And I guess the first thank you then is our ability to do that had everything to do with all of you, especially if you're a part of Narrate when all this happens. The permission to see us not judging you if you weren't coming, the permission to support us if you were, the permission, the volunteering you did. I remember I was so proud of Gay and Lexi, who lead our kids in nursery in this season, because we'd group up down in the basement. We kind of, as we tear down, we just kind of meet in wherever the last person working is. Usually that's downstairs. And I remember for weeks it'd be like, hey Gay, how many babies did you have? And she'd be like, 1. Her dad works on staff. Lexi, how many kids do you have? And it was like the same 3 kids for weeks and weeks and weeks, and it just grew slowly. But I guess I just want to say thank you for the permission that you created to help us get going again. And that leads to the second thing that I think is even bigger, because I had in these conversations, 2 of them were from a local circumstance, others again were from the context of this article. But people were asking, like, why are you guys doing so well if so many places are struggling? And I'm not trying to be braggadocious or put us on a podium or be self-righteous, but do you ever say things and you don't actually know if you believe them till after you've said them? Any verbal processors in the room? That's definitely me. That's why I rehearse out loud all week long. That's why I talk too much. I have to hear it before I can really understand what it is that I'm thinking. And in those conversations, what I caught myself saying is, I think the reason we're doing so well is because in the process of opening as early as we did, I think it gave us permission to grieve what we needed to grieve. I actually feel really bad for places that are reopening now and only now being confronted with, hey, that playbook that you developed for sometimes decades, it doesn't work anymore. And I think what it allowed us to do from this room all the way through the kids and everything in between scattering was, first of all, grieve that which we had spent 12 years building it was gone, that we were in rebuild mode. But more than anything, what it allowed us to do is form new identity, to honor the past, to recognize we're not repenting of anything from the past and the way we did things, but it also what we've done over time. And this is where genuinely I'm thankful for you and your patience, and you're allowing us to experiment with things like communion in a series that seems to never end. Is I think what it allowed us to do is really form new identity and understand what does it look like to help people in their pursuit of Christ in this moment, in this season. And frankly, there's no doubt in my mind the reason we're invigorated as a staff is because we've kind of built a new playbook. And that's not to say we're not going to have to learn again, and it's not to say it's done, but it has everything to do with saying thank you. Like, thanks for your openness to change. Thanks for your openness to at times disagree. I was trained by somebody who used to say, Adam, if the only thing you do is move the plant on the stage from the right side to the left side, do at least that every month, which is kind of this absurd idea now, like plants on the stage. I think we did a lot of that, and quite frankly, we couldn't have done that without your support, so thank you. I do think that relates to these parables we just read, because as we'll explore this morning, the world in which Jesus was born, the world where he lived and served and walked and died, the world where he resurrected, was a world that was asking a question very similar to our own. And that is, where is all this going? Like, where is the world going? We're going to explore this quite a bit in Advent and again on Christmas Eve, but to read the early narratives, and this is why I think that if we access them differently this Christmas, we can unlock so much in our own lives. The world was one in which people were well aware that the world was not working as it should. They were grieving what used to be and what could be and what happened. They were agreeing and disagreeing on what was the problem and who was the problem and how do we solve the problem. And on that level, it's just like our own. Like for months, for almost 2 years, since March, we've been asking the same question, I think. Where's it all going? It started with COVID, but it quickly became way bigger than that, a culture that, have you ever in your life seen families torn apart by politics like they currently are? Have you ever in your life, like there's such a high percentage of people who now find their identity first and foremost in a polarizing political position? I was thinking about it this week. I was trained by people, and what we learned, even as a church together, was like sometime in early October, before a general election, with that election being in November, we got to start talking about the election in a way that kind of challenges one another to engage politically in a way that reflects Christ, in a way that reflects a diversity of opinion. Remember, we would say, like, we want this to be a kind of place where people from both sides of the aisle can grow and follow Jesus. I was in a meeting this week. It was actually a council meeting this week, and what occurred to me, I actually started to get some anxiety about 2023. I don't mean to share that with you, but it's like, it feels like 2022 will be a hiatus, and then in 2023, but what hit me was if we're not actually challenging one another on how we engage by like March of 2023, like we're already behind. Like, where's all this going? An environmental crisis that some believe and others don't. The price of a gallon of milk right now and inflation. It's just one thing, a 24/7 news cycle that certainly isn't helping any of our anxiety or our political ideation. A social media platform that allows us to say things to one another that we would never say to their face. That allows us to make things facts that there's just no way of quantifying. It's everywhere. And so here's where I'm excited about this particular weekend and these parables is what I want to suggest is what if Jesus, whose world was facing very similar things, it was different names, it was Rome, it was Caesar, it was Greek culture, it was the gymnasium, different cultural dynamics. But what if these parables are, in a very real sense, Jesus weighing in on the answer to the question, where is it all leading? How do we find our way through this? Are we supposed to celebrate the value of our home now or mourn the fact that if it doesn't change, our kids will never own one? Like, how do we do this? And it starts with a very troubling parable, a parable about weeds and wheat. For some of you, it brings up some things that are spiritual triggers for you. For others, it's reasons why you would never go to church. It has this allusion to ideas around hell. But here's the good news. The word hell is actually never in the parable. But there's some troubling language. I just pulled a few of them. Devil's in there. Weeds is in there. And so is this not so benign idea of bind them in bundles to be burned. What do we do with this? Well, if you could, I'd just like to slow down because I actually think this has become one of my favorite parts in all of Matthew because of what Jesus is doing. Question: does Jesus in the parable tell us where evil comes from? We explored this a couple weeks ago. He doesn't. Never is he claiming the origin or the source of evil. It's not in there. What does it tell us? Well, it tells us, it would seem, first of all, that evil, the devil, in this case is the language he uses, that it's sabotaging God's plan, that like a cancer, it's destroying what it was that God was trying to do on the planet. It's ruining it. It's soiling it. There's many different words we could use, but it's destroying it. And what else does it tell us? Is God going to do something about it? Does he have a plan for that? Is it all going somewhere? And here's the important piece and why I have a giant ball of Play-Doh in my hand. I think the great permission of this parable is to analyze and assess some of our own classic, I'm going to argue mostly Protestant, mostly modern Western views of hell. Because what is it actually saying Jesus is doing? Let me read it again, and then I just want to tee this up because I think this is actually wildly inviting, not threatening. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was asleep, an enemy came and sowed seeds among the wheat and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. And the slaves of the householder came and said to him, "Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from?" And he answered, "An enemy has done this." The slave said to him, "Then did you want us to go and gather them?" And he replied, "No, for in gathering the weeds," remember this is a Matthew sympathetic to outsiders, "in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let them grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time, I'll tell the reapers, collect the weeds first, bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn." Here's the question. I'm indebted to a guy who wrote a book called The Skeletons in God's Closet. I have not read the whole thing, but it's a remarkable book. I put it on the mind map. He's the type of guy you can put that in your podcast app and find him making lots of comments. But what he points out is what the parable is not saying is that what God does is show up, and if we could represent evil with red and heaven with white, what it doesn't say is that God shows up and he sorts some people into hell and some people into heaven, and that really this earth receptacle has no purpose other than God's plan for populating this kind of unseen realm of where people flit about with bows and arrows or harps or whatever it is they do. Like what he points out is Jesus is not saying that the whole plan is God's going to sort some into heaven and some into hell. What is it saying? And I love this phrase. I think it's so accessible for me in my own theology around hell. What is it saying? Isn't it saying that Jesus came to get the hell out? Kind of a fun way to think about it. And I think a very accurate one. That Jesus' commitment is not this sorting for heaven and hell, but it's this commitment to recognizing something's destroying his kids, and his commitment is he's going to get the hell out of his creation. That there's a unity of heaven and earth that the original project had in mind, that evil's destroying that, and he's here to deal with it. But what are the implications of that for these first century listeners of Jesus? Is it going to happen on their timeline? Are they as qualified to do the work themselves as they would like to think? What are the circumstances in Jesus' day? They're dealing with Rome. They're dealing with Caesar and Herod, a culture that was perverse in so many different directions. Jesus has mostly, up until this point in Matthew, we parted ways from the Sadducees and the Essenes and these other people from other parts of the country. Ever since John's baptism, what we've been dealing with are Pharisees. Northern Jewish people, Jesus' closest friends and family, these what you might consider working class, conservative people who have a deep passion for God, and they're really mad at Rome, and they're convinced that their job is to pick up a sword and get Rome out of their country. They have in mind something like the Maccabean revolt, which wasn't that far before them, where Israel did just that. They had their own kind of coup, and they drove these foreign occupiers out, and for a couple generations, they had their temple and their palace and their land back. And Jesus, throughout the narrative, is saying to them, I understand that you think that the model are the Maccabees, and I'm telling you, it's going to get you crushed. And of course, in AD 70, he was proven right. To this day, there's not a temple in Jerusalem because of this conflict. What is Jesus saying? He's saying, I'll deal with the evil. I'll handle it. Which begs then the question, how? And I want to suggest, which brings us back to the next parable. If he's saying, I'm going to deal with this, well, how is he going to deal with this? There's a parable about a mustard seed. He put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. It's the smallest of all the seeds, but when it is grown, it's the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree. So that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. Some of you already know that even in modern Israel, the mustard plant is a noxious weed. It's a type of thing that if it takes root, it splits sidewalks and comes up through asphalt. Why would Matthew use a negative image for this? Remember, Matthew is sympathetic to Gentiles and outsiders. But aside from that, how is God dealing with evil? How is he doing it? Well, it's something like a mustard seed that starts so small, so innocuous, that slowly takes root and slowly takes over. It's something like, isn't it? Like a police officer who develops a vision for the kingdom, who understands how God brings change to the world, and just shows up differently. It's something like the teacher who's going to walk into Capitol High tomorrow, isn't it? With a different vision and a different worldview, and a Jesus-driven compassion for people. It's something like a high school student who knows the hope of Christ, and it's this small thing. Think of your own story. To the extent that you're connected with Christ, my bet is that when you originally said yes, you had no idea the bigger implications in your life. You heard some message, you read some book, you had some leader who over the course of years cast a vision. You eventually said yes, whether it was in a moment or in a season. You had no idea just the extent to which one idea after another, one view, one belief, one action after another would slowly be impacted by this tiny little decision. How is this going to happen? It's something like yeast. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until it was all leavened. I was recently in a meeting with some friends, and one of the people in there challenged us around this idea that years ago, C.S. Lewis, if you're familiar with C.S. Lewis, he issued this challenge, and the challenge was that for every book written in your lifetime, you should read a book not written in your lifetime. And his point was that they're both equally imperfect, but you can see the imperfections better when it's not like the water that you're living in. I was challenged. I thought he made a good point. And in fact, part of C.S. Lewis's point is this idea that why are we willing to read a 1,000-page book that's telling us about the church father Athanasius? Why don't we just go read Athanasius' 100-page book? Valid point, I thought. So I left that meeting, literally bought a book by Athanasius, who before this meeting I'd never heard of. He's an early church father who lived early 300s, mid 300s to early 400s. He wrote a book called On the Incarnation. His work is pivotal in the early church's development of theology. It's called The Incarnation, and the big thing he's working on is why did God have to become human? And it's fascinating. It's completely devoid of some of our current metaphors that involve a courtroom and those types of kind of because someone had to pay. He actually tells it like this in one part. He said, it's like an image that's been etched on to a piece of wood, a photo, if you will, or a painting, if you will. And it's like over time, sin and evil so soiled the image that it was no longer even recognizable. And so in answering the question, why did God have to become human? What he says is humanity had so lost touch with what it means to be human, so lost touch with how God called them to function in the world. Even in Genesis, humanity goes last in the procession of creation. Why? Because that which leads the worship service goes last. Humans were supposed to lead what it means to be human. And his point is, so why did God become human? Well, God became human to more or less function as a model so that we could repaint the image, so that humanity could rediscover what does it mean to be human. I love the image, and it's so central to what Matthew's been doing in this gospel if you've been following. Remember, he started 2 kingdoms. You want to go Herod's way or you want the kingdom of God? Jesus' invitation was never heaven when you die. It was a whole new view of life that included that. He gets into the Sermon on the Mount, and he says, Herod's kingdom does anger this way, but if this mustard seed takes root in your heart, you'll do anger this way. Herod's kingdom does sexual satisfaction this way. God's kingdom does it this way. Herod's kingdom does control and language this way. God's kingdom does it this way. Herod's kingdom does freedom this way. God's kingdom does it this way. Herod's kingdom manages the importance of what other people think of them this way. God's kingdom does it this other way. Herod's kingdom thinks about money and possessions this way. God's kingdom thinks about it this way. It's over and over an invitation. I believe that the Catholic theology for it is divinization, which doesn't mean you become God, but it recognizes that you were called to something more and something eternal. And Jesus' vision for evil then is what? This is why I don't like the pastoral hierarchy. I think what Avery does and Hannah does and Lexi does and the rest of us is incredibly important, but is it more important than the mom who's in a season where she's raising kids at home? Is it more important than the teacher who will walk into Bryant's school tomorrow? It can't be. Because God's vision is what? For evil. Well, then what's our role within it? What's your role? And this is, I think, the challenging piece. It's a parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid, and then in his joy goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. It's a little bit like last week. Notice first and foremost, it implies you got to work for it. This doesn't come cheaply. This isn't just like the Gideon Bible outside the high school. No offense to the Gideons. Like, you got to want this. You got to work for this. But it's also what? It becomes the most important thing. What's our role? Isn't it to recognize that the wise thing is to go, hey, the only hope this world has is the kingdom of God taking root in the hearts and lives of people. Where's it going? It's going towards people who are doing that. There's another one. The kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. Notice that Jesus isn't couching that this is supposed to be easy. His suggestion is your role is this becomes your one thing. And why? And this gets difficult. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and caught fish of every kind. When it was full, they threw it ashore, sat down, and put the good into baskets, but threw out the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the furnace of fire where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's uncomfortable. Now, if the idea of eternal torment is uncomfortable to you, I'm with you. And before you get too distracted by this, it's, I think, very fair to say that historic Orthodox Christianity does not require that you believe in a place of eternal torment. It certainly allows for that, but there are plenty of examples from early church history, and especially non-Western church history, that doesn't require that view of hell. What does it require? The danger of total loss. The notion that you can actually live poorly. That total loss is a real threat. I was close to a memorial service this week, and this is no reflection of the memorial service itself, but it did remind me of one, I think, very important thing. Those aren't the places where it's appropriate to say, you can waste your life. It's probably malpractice, as one friend said to me this morning, it's probably malpractice to tell someone after they died that you can waste your life. But Jesus isn't hiding from the fact that in this context, when dealing with the living, you can waste your life. It's as if he's saying, the world's going somewhere. That somewhere matters. God does have a plan. It involves the kingdom taking root in you, and you can completely miss it. As the band comes forward, I know there's a heaviness to this, but I've been reading, I'm getting ready for the Lent series, and one of the things that I learned, it's kind of blowing my mind, but Another friend pointed out, if you go look up an old painting of Jerome, who was this early church father, and other monks of his era, there's almost always a human skull on their desk, which sounds so morbid, and frankly, I've never been one who really loves like skull art, but it's helped me appreciate. No, it actually goes back to early church history. And oftentimes they would have a sign behind the desk that said something like, "Where you are, I once was, and where I am, you too will be." As if that's not morbid enough, what I didn't realize that in many monasteries and abbeys and things of that nature, even in the present day, they purposely put the cemetery, when they can, in an area of the abbey where you can't avoid it on a daily basis. And in many cases, what they do is they actually dig a 6-foot hole and leave it there as this daily visual reminder. From ashes you were made, and to ashes you'll return. The divine breath does not belong to you. You're a steward. I want to end with this, and then we'll give you a chance to grab communion and just reflect on the body and the blood and the stewards that we are. This is from John Mark Comer's new book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, but this quote is actually from a guy named William Irvine, and it says this: "There is a danger that you will mislive, that despite all your activity, despite all the pleasant diversions you might have enjoyed while alive, you'll end up living a bad life. There is, in other words, a danger that when you're on your deathbed, you'll look back and realize that you wasted your one chance at living. Instead of spending your life pursuing something genuinely valuable, you squandered it because you allowed yourself to be distracted by the various baubles life has to offer." What if part of the function of this and the church coming together is this recognition that the world's going somewhere, and God's invitation sits there to be a part of what he's doing? Jesus, it's remarkable to have the invitation to be a part of your divine conspiracy, and that you would do it not in the way that things generally happen, but one relationship, one person, one family, one community at a time. And Lord, there's not a person in this room who's not going somewhere tonight, tomorrow morning, where your strategy for that space, whether it's a neighborhood or an office, a relationship, a classroom, a school, where your strategy is you in them, and them with a towel over their arm representing you in that space. God, I pray for stay-at-home parents. I pray for teachers. Oh God, for our teachers tomorrow, that you'd give them remarkable spiritual energy and connection with you. Pray for our administrators and our therapists. And probably more than any of that, Lord, I pray for our students who do carry you in them, and they're on teams and they're in classrooms, and they also have their own challenges, but they have a hope that's not easily explained. I pray that you'd lead them in the opportunities that you're going to provide them, especially tomorrow and Tuesday and Wednesday. God, that they wouldn't be burdened by having answers, but they'd have the gift of really good questions and unexplainable hope. Jesus, thanks that, man, it's just crazy how the early church just mocked death and the loss of its power over us, and pray that part of the invitation of this COVID season would be the church is reclaiming that the resurrection is not just a charade, and it's not just some thing that we do, that we're a part of a historic movement that recognized that you defeated the biggest weapon evil had. We love you, God. Amen.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Narrate Church, find us online at narratechurch.org or look us up on Facebook or Instagram.